Buonasera a tutti, benvenuti al ciclo di forum interreligiosi, noi li chiamiamo i forum del lunedì, questa nuova edizione di questo anno accademico 2022-2023. Benvenuti a tutti, benvenuti ai presenti, alle anche autorità che vengono dalle ambasciate presso la Santa Sede, Sua Eccellenza il Vescovo, l'Arcivescovo, e a voi tutti quanti amici che siete qui presenti e anche agli amici che sono online, perché la conferenza di questa sera è anche in streaming. Stasera diamo l'inizio quindi ai forum interreligiosi. Avete possibilità di accedere al programma online con tutta la lista dei forum. Come sapete si alternano forum sul rapporto tra cristianesimo e Islam, come quello di stasera, e cristianesimo e religioni dell'Asia, e guardando anche diversi contesti nei quali questo rapporto, queste relazioni si sviluppano e si vivono. E stasera iniziamo con le relazioni tra cristianesimo e Islam e abbiamo il piacere di avere con noi dall'India padre Victor Edwin, gesuita. Padre Victor è un carissimo amico, lavoriamo da tanto tempo insieme, è professore al Vidyajyoti College Theology a Delhi, Nuova Delhi, la capitale dell'India, ed è una persona che soprattutto, oltre che preparato dal punto di vista accademico, è una persona impegnata moltissimo dal punto di vista delle relazioni islamo-cristiane, nei contatti col mondo musulmano, specialmente nel contesto indiano. Ci racconterà anche di questo suo lavoro, di questa esperienza pluriennale. Padre Victor ha studiato Islamic Studies ad Aligarh, una università musulmana, ottenendo il suo Master of Arts, e poi successivamente una specializzazione in Christian-Muslim Relations all'Università di Birmingham nel Regno Unito, e successivamente ha conseguito il PhD in Islamic Studies a un'università famosa di studi islamici, la Jamia Millia Islamia di New Delhi, nel 2014. Insegna teologia e relazioni islamo-cristiane al Vidyajyoti, come dicevo, al Vidyajyoti Institute of Religious Studies, e poi tra l'altro è il responsabile di una rivista, The Journal of the Islamic Studies Association di Delhi, che si chiama Salam, ed è anche il segretario generale di questa associazione, di cui poi magari ci parlerà un po'. E di recente abbiamo pubblicato insieme un volume che abbiamo anche presentato qui in gregoriana, A Call to Dialogue, Christians in Dialogue with Muslims, proprio in occasione dei 40 anni, qualche anno fa, di questa rivista, raccogliendo il contributo e selezionando il contributo di alcuni autori e anche di questo lavoro nelle relazioni islamo-cristiane, ma di recente, proprio recentissimo, in questi ultimi mesi, ha lavorato molto producendo dei testi che vi mostro qui velocemente, Fratelli tutti, un testo insieme anche ad un altro famoso teologo indiano, Michael Amalados e Anthony Lawrence, Fratelli tutti, an Indian Reading, e poi un altro testo è Brother to All, The Life and Witness of St. Charles de Foucault, è una collezione di articoli su questo tema, su Charles de Foucault, e poi ha curato un libretto, Journeying with Muslims, Listening, Praying and Working Together, dedicato al cardinal Michael Fitzgerald, che come sapete è stato presidente anche del Pontificio Consiglio per il dialogo interreligioso. Quindi lo ringraziamo molto della sua presenza, siamo onorati di averlo con noi. E il tema di questa sera è, come dicevo, abbiamo cercato di inserire queste riflessioni sulle relazioni interreligiose anche in una maniera contestuale, perché sappiamo bene che le relazioni si sviluppano, si vivono il tema è sulle relazioni, quindi non è solo lo studio, diciamo, di una particolare tradizione religiosa, ma è anche come questa si vive poi, queste relazioni si vivono all'interno dei contesti. E quindi abbiamo fatto un po' questa scelta di campo in modo che conosciamo anche il contesto. E il tema di questa sera sono le relazioni islamo-cristiane. Il tema in inglese, il titolo è Fraternal Journey in the Emerging New India, quindi un percorso all'interno di questa nuova India emergente. E la conferenza, padre Edwin la terrà in inglese, ma vi è stato distribuito il testo in italiano per quelli che hanno, diciamo, non conoscono bene l'inglese, e poi c'è la possibilità, ecco, di fare anche le domande in italiano, le tradurremo sul momento, quindi di avere questo scambio. E per chi invece è a casa potrà inviare un'email e gli invieremo volentieri poi il testo tradotto in italiano per chi ha qualche difficoltà poi a, come dire, a comprendere tutto quello che viene detto. Leggo brevemente un po' l'abstract di cosa parleremo questa sera, di cosa ci presenterà padre Victor. In questo momento storico l'India sta attraversando tempi turbolenti. Negli ultimi 3 decenni le minoranze, i Dalit e i tribali hanno subito il peso del comunalismo, una politica su base identitaria. In India i musulmani sono una grande minoranza, rappresentano il 14%, mentre i cristiani sono il 2%, una piccolissima minoranza. Per cui ecco, è interessante vedere queste relazioni tra 2 minoranze in un contesto di maggioranza hindu. Per impegnarsi efficacemente con le persone di altre fedi e soprattutto con i musulmani in questo contesto è necessario avere una visione delle relazioni tra cristiani e musulmani in India. Questa visione deve andare oltre i regolari incontri interreligiosi con i musulmani ed esplorare e trovare le comunità musulmane che sono marginali e sfruttate, specialmente i musulmani Pasmanda, nella nuova India emergente. Questa visione richiede studi seri sulle strutture sociali e sulla storia dei musulmani. Quindi padre Edwin ci mostrerà questo percorso, quindi noi lo ringraziamo ancora una volta. Vi ricordo che al termine della sua relazione abbiamo una mezz'oretta di tempo, 30 minuti, 40 minuti, per poter avere un dibattito, un colloquio, una conversazione dove siete liberissimi di esprimere i vostri pareri, le vostre domande, e anzi le auspichiamo perché il forum è fatto per questo, quindi deve esserci un dialogo e quindi speriamo che potremo vivere insieme questo tempo. Quindi grazie ancora per essere qui, grazie Victor, thank you very much for being with us. We welcome you and we are ready to listen to your talk.
Thank you. Dear brothers and sisters, good afternoon to you. I'm very grateful to Professor Ambrogio for inviting me to this afternoon session. In this presentation, I share my reflections on some new possibilities for deep dialogue with Muslim communities, especially Pasmanda Muslims in India. The aspirations, desires, worries, and anxieties of these communities, to my knowledge, not adequately represented in regular interfaith dialogue among Christians and Muslims in India. So in the first section, I briefly present the dominance of a particular vision of India that is divisive in its DNA, and how this vision is antithetical to the vision of India that is enshrined in the Constitution of India. In the second section, I discuss the rationale for dialogue between Pasmanda Muslims and Dalit Christians in the present context of India. Pasmanda Muslims are the weaker sections of Muslims who are converted to Islam from the backward and most backward and Dalit communities of India. In the concluding remarks, I shall point out to the work of a group of scholar activists from both Pasmanda Muslims and Dalit Christians who explore Christian-Muslim relations, Christian-Muslim dialogue at Vidyajyoti Institute of Religious Studies, Delhi. An inclusive vision. There are two visions for India that are sharply contesting with one another in the emerging new India. One vision is inclusive in its nature, that embraces diversity, respecting diverse identities of the people of India. And the other is exclusive and negates difference and forces uniformity. In the context of freedom struggle, Mahatma Gandhiji, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, and Baba Saheb Ambedkar, they envisioned an India as a pluralistic nation because they knew intuitively that it would be a Himalayan task to achieve an Indian consensus on history, culture, and an idea of a people. They had gone to great lengths to animate the Indian National Congress, founded in 1885, which was powered by a sense of anti-colonial grievances into a political party that represented all sections of people. Gandhiji's political ideas and anti-colonial strategies were designed to extend Congress's pluralism to a new epoch of mass politics. Mass politics to Gandhiji meant adopting the style of civil disobedience he had learnt from South Africa to the vastness of India. His politics embraced the poor of India and the largest minority of India, the Muslims. On gaining independence, these leaders, along with many others, were determined to enshrine the pluralistic nature of India in the Indian Constitution. Ambedkar and the framers of our Constitution made this vision into a reality after many and intense debates, and the Constitution was adopted on 26th November 1949. There's an exclusive vision. This inclusive vision of the Constitution was contested and continued to be contested by another competing vision, Hindutva, which imagines a nation that is founded on one language, one religion, and one culture. Hindutva is the political idea of the Hindu right and the ideology of RSS, in Hindi Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, National Volunteers Organization founded in 1925. Hindutva, is Hinduness, seeks to do away with diversity and to make India a Hindu Rashtra. This orthodox type of nationalism in India, which calls for homogeneity, is advanced by right-wing Hindutva groups. They invoke uniformity by basing themselves on one religious, that is, Hindu identity. This neglects diversity and equates nationalism with majoritarianism. Such majoritarianism creates first-class and second-class citizens. One dominant community corners power for oneself with a powerful political rhetoric. The RSS and their ideological associates hold on to such a truncated vision and threaten to destroy the face of a diverse nation. This vision has been bought by dominant castes and affluent sections who have vested interests. The BJP government, the political associates of the RSS that runs the central government today in India and many state governments, wants to do away with unity amidst diversity and dreams of a single culture for the whole nation. One of the ideologues of Hindutva, Savarkar, wrote a foundational text for this movement. According to him, a Hindu alone can claim citizenship in India. At the heart of this theory, Hinduism is not stressed as a religion among many religions in India, but it was stressed as a culture. This theory embraces a few faith traditions such as Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. But what about Christians and Muslims who have been part of this country, India? Well, Christians and Muslims may share the land but not the culture, since they accepted alien cultures with roots not in India but elsewhere. This is their argument. Thus, Christians and Muslims are branded as foreigners in our own land. What is the locus standi of these two sets of believers? Golwalkar, another ideologue of Hindutva, he wrote, "The foreign races in Hindustan, in India, must either adopt Hindu culture and language, must learn to respect and hold reverence in Hindu religion, must entertain no ideas but those of the glorification of the Hindu race and culture, or may stay in this country wholly subordinated to the Hindu nation, claiming nothing, deserving no privileges, far less any preferential treatment, not even citizens' rights." In contrast to this narrow understanding, the Constitution of India stands tall and embraces all cultures, religions, and traditions, respecting the uniqueness of all without collapsing this diversity into some form of uniformity that never exists. All efforts to impose a one language, one culture, one nation ideology, I think, is an insult to a nation that is blessed with such diversity. The Constitution envisions that all who live within the territory of India are citizens of India, whatever culture, religion, or social group they may belong to. Phrase it differently, the idea of India enshrined in the Constitution is essentially territorial. Consequently, all who live within the geographical area of India are citizens with equal rights and responsibilities. As pointed out, the Hindu vision opposes radically this grand vision of Indian Constitution. In 1947, when India was partitioned into Pakistan and India, the Hindu right expected a Hindu India to be born along with Muslim Pakistan. As mentioned, the Constitutional Assembly dismissed the idea of a nation founded on one religion after intense debates. However, the BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, which is in power now, strives for making citizenship based on religion, a move that will alienate the minorities and vulnerable groups and endanger their lives. It is in this context we must envision Christian-Muslim relations. A previous section I presented the context of India. In this section, we shall discuss the task of building relations between Christians and Muslims in India in this present context. We have a long history of Christians and Muslims living together harmoniously along with peoples of other traditions. Millions of Muslims and Christians over the centuries interacted with one another as neighbors, sharing cultural heritages of their contexts. In their day-to-day interactions, they did not bracket out of their faiths. Though they did not emphasize doctrines, in their lives they tried to give witness to their faiths in harmonious ways. Thus, they saw religion not as barriers, but rather as bridges that connected them. They listened to one another and lived lives enriched. History also records a few religious conversations in the royal courts that focused on doctrines. Students of Christian Muslim relations will know the historical event of Jesuit and the Dominican, along with few other priests, visiting the court of Ali Adil Shah, the Sultan of Bijapur. Then Jesuits, three teams of Jesuits meeting the Mughal emperors Akbar and Jahangir. There are historical events in which these men dedicated to God engaged in conversation with Muslims. They tried to, they based their conversation on rational discourse. They tried to show Christian faith as superior to Muslim faith. But interestingly, during this conversation, there are also some artists engaging with the Mughals in terms of paintings, in terms of sharing their the works on art, in order to create some intellectual exchanges between Christians and Muslims. But rather, we always remember the rational discourse between the Jesuits and the Mughal emperor and the Sultan of Bijapur. There are also the evangelicals engaged with conversation with Muslims. They also adopted a polemical approach in which they engaged with Muslims. In the words of a Christian troll would say that debating or confrontationist approaches really sowed the seeds of enmity and hatred in the hearts of Indian Muslims. They started to suspect the missionary efforts of the Christians as a plot to destroy Islam in India. But in contrast to this polemical approach, we also find three important Jesuits in the 20th century engaged with Muslims. These three pioneers, the beginning, this one, Victor Courtois, a Belgian Jesuit who worked in Bengal, Calcutta, the Jesuit province. He is considered to be a pioneer in Christian-Muslim relations in India in the 20th century, because in many of his attitudes, he anticipated the attitudes of the Vatican too. He felt Indian church is neglecting Muslims. The scholarship with about Hinduism and engagement with Hindu religion, there are a lot of scholars, but he found that no one is taking interest on Indian Muslims. He said that we neglect Muslims in India, we cannot neglect Muslims. And he said we must reach out to them. How do we reach out to them? He said it's not as adversaries, but as brothers and sisters. So he brings a new approach to Christian-Muslim relations in India. And in his writings, we find that he is inviting Christians to share the spiritual riches of Christianity with Muslims. And also he says we must also open to receive the spiritual riches that Muslims can offer to us in our religious conversations. So in a way, he says that we must present Christianity in a peaceful way, in a beautiful way. And he would emphasize that we must bring Muslims to the heart of Christ, not telling their faith is something inferior, but respecting them, loving them, and bringing them close to the heart of Jesus, not changing their religion, but as Muslims, they have, they could reach Jesus, they could experience the presence of Christ in their lives. That was his approach. He says that we are like a family. Christians and Muslims in India are like a family members. We may have different ways of understanding God and different ways of worshiping God. But because we differ in our faith convictions, it should not take us to conflicts. Rather, we must love, we must understand, we must learn from them. So he said in his writings that we must recognize the common elements in between, the common features in our religions. At the same time, we must also recognize the differences. So for him, a deep knowledge of Islam and a very special love for Muslims must be like two sides of the same coin in our approach towards Muslims. And he writes beautifully that Christians and Muslims should not be afraid of giving witness to one another's faith. When we give witness to one another's faith, he writes that we come to recognize the features of our Heavenly Father in one another. So we really recognize our brothers and sisters, Muslim brothers and sisters, as our own brothers and sisters. The second important scholar who advanced Christian-Muslim dialogue is Christian W. Troll, a German Jesuit who lived and worked in India for many years. Then he returned to Europe. For him, one of the important elements of dialogue is discernment. We must discern the way of God in the lives of Christians and in the lives of Muslims. By discerning the way of God in the lives of Christians and Muslims, we could establish long-standing friendships. He did establish long-standing friendships between Christians and Muslims. He said, no, our approach should be transparent and we should be cordial in our relationship with Muslims. In our approach, he emphasizes the objectivity and scientific approach and sympathy. This is very important for Christian-Muslim relations. And thirdly, he also emphasizes that we must not neglect the differences. Differences in the normative and doctrinal level must be recognized and affirmed. Failure to recognize the differences will lead us to a syncretism, and it would not be a deep dialogue. So these are the three important elements he says as an to begin a conversation with Muslims. And he also finds that the dialogue should be founded on anthropological foundation and theological foundation. He says sociological reasons like we are a diverse people, we are living together, so we must have good relationship. Yes, sociological reasons, that's not enough. He says we must recognize the human dignity and human freedom are very much part of our dialogical process. We must recognize that every human person has the freedom to search and find the truth and adhere to the truth. So we must recognize and respect that. If a practitioner of dialogue, if he does not or if she does not respect this, then dialogue would be superficial. And also, theological foundation, he would speak that the triune God relates with humanity in many diverse ways. He would say the faith, hope, and charity dispose every Christian to love to live in relationship with triune God. So the whole humanity forms one family. So it would emphasize that the Spirit is accompanying us, and we could recognize the work of the Spirit in other religions, in the lives of others. So these are very important considerations for Christians and Christian-Muslim relations, he emphasized. And witness to one another's faith, drawing from inspiration from Victor Coutua, Christian Troll also emphasizes that we must give witness to one another. And also he would write that every Christian has a moral obligation to give witness to his or her faith. Similarly, Muslims also have the moral obligation to give witness to his or her faith. So witness dimension is very necessary for any serious dialogue. If no attention is given to witness, dialogue would be superficial. So once again, his emphasis is knowledge of Islam and love for Muslims, and the witnessing dimensions are the ingredients of any serious dialogue. The third pioneer, Paul Jackson, for him, one of his principles is that we know Islam through meeting Muslims. There is no alternative to personal engagement with Muslims. We are not dialoguing with the system Islam, with the law, but we are engaging with Muslim brothers and sisters. So for him, listening is the key to enter into the world of Muslims. He would say that we have the temptation, Christians have the temptation to give our faith, to speak about our faith, to share the riches of our faith. But he says the real dialogue will happen only in receiving. Certainly we share our riches, but also with the humbly receiving from the other. So for him, to receiving, not giving, is at the heart of dialogue. So for Paul Jackson goes much deeper and says that the ability to see God in and through the eyes of my Muslim brother and sister is the deepest form of solidarity. I think that's a very important, he shares engaging with Muslims. So he would say that discernment of the spirits, finding God in the life of Muslims, and complete trust in God who works in all our lives. These are important for dialogue. But I find, these insights, the insights of these Jesuits, which is in contrast with what happened in the past, more polemical, more debating type of the conversations. These new insights are, I think, not really absorbed in the reflection process of Indian Church. The Catholic Church, I think, is very slow to wake up and appropriate the contribution of these men. Today, reflecting on dialogue, some people would say that Christian-Muslim dialogue is often churchy in India today. There are several dialogue meetings organized by parishes and many religious congregations across India on various occasions, like religious feasts of various religions and days of national importance. In these meetings, Christians and Muslims speak about their faith convictions, very important, giving witness to their faith, the necessity of peace and interfaith understanding among them. Such meetings are indeed wonderful initiatives. Interfaith celebrations offer spaces for people to share their faith convictions and give witness to their faith comfortably in a peaceful manner, in a trustful ambience. They are fruitful as it brings people together, help them to overcome their many prejudices about one another, and help them to learn something new about others and oneself. I call them churchy since most of such meetings are organized and sponsored by the church organizations. They stop there without much follow-up. In my opinion, it must not stop there. It must go beyond the routine. It must be critical and creative. Further, if dialogical relations had to expand and bring desired fruits, such efforts must not overlook the context of India that I presented in the beginning of our conversation. The context of India and India were competing visions that I pointed out in the introductory sections. As a student and a practitioner of Christian-Muslim relations, I believe that to engage effectively with people of other faiths, especially in the given context, it is necessary to have a vision for Christian-Muslim relations in India. The vision must look beyond regular interfaith meetings with Muslims and explore and find Muslim communities who are marginalized and exploited, especially the Pasmanda Muslims. This vision demands serious studies in Muslim social structures and histories. From 2019 onwards, a few Pasmanda intellectuals, scholars, and activists, along with a few Dalit Christian scholars and activists, gathered and deliberated on issues both communities confront in emerging New India. One of the first tasks was to bring out a little booklet on Pasmanda Muslim icons, presenting their contribution to the freedom struggle and the upliftment of marginalized Pasmanda Muslims. Who are these Pasmanda Muslims I am talking about? Although casteism is primarily rooted within a Hindu religious framework, caste consciousness has made deep inroads into the lives of Indian Muslims. Indian society is marked with hierarchical classification of people into 4 categories. These 4 varnas unfold into a caste system: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. The boundaries are rigid between the castes, and they are organized by occupation and maintained through endogamy. There are 3 broad Muslim caste groupings in India: the Ashraf, the nobles; the Ajlaf, the lowly; and the Arzal, the Dalits. The Ashrafs are of Arab and Persian, Turkish, or Afghan origin. Some Ashrafs claim that they belong to prestigious lineages that are traced back to the Prophet in case of Sayyids, or his tribe in case of Qurayshis. The Sheikhs, supposedly descendants of Prophet's companions; the Pathans, descendants of migrants from Afghanistan; the Mughals, originating in Central Asia and Iran, are included among Ashrafs. Many Ashrafs are either ulama or landowners, merchants, and business people. Birth in these groups constitutes a major criterion for defining their social status. One can notice here that the distinction between Arab and non-Arab remains fundamental. We find Ajlaf, the low-born, considered to be low-born, in the middle, and their status is defined by their ancestral profession. They are descendants of local converts to Islam. Many castes of intermediate status fall into this category, such as farmers, traders, and weavers. Many Ashrafs believe that this category should remain outside of any emancipation process. At the bottom of the social scale, we find Arzals, which is vile or vulgar. Arzals are Muslims who are descendants of converts from castes that today are considered as Dalits. Ajlaf as well as Arzal Muslims together are called Pasmanda Muslims. The word Pasmanda is a Persian word that means people who are left behind or pushed down. So the Muslims, SC Muslims, together they comprise the low castes or Pasmanda Muslims. The Pasmanda experience is famously expressed by one of the important Pasmanda Muslim leader, a parliamentarian, Ali Anwar Sahib. In his speech at the conference, he said, हम शुद्र हैं, भारत की मूलवासी हैं, बाद में मुसलमान हैं. We are Shudras first, we are indigenous people of India, and we are Muslims later. It is important to highlight the fact that, like Hindu caste society, relations among Muslim social groups are governed by a series of social taboos, spatial restrictions. However, these taboos, which aim to distance the high caste from the low, not based on the notion of ritual contamination in the strictest sense by which it is defined in Hinduism. Relationships between Ashraf and Dalit Muslims are defined through caste endogamy. Now, in this context, our dialogue, Christian-Muslim dialogue, must have a vision to regain dignity of all. A secular vision is at the heart of Indian Constitution. We reflected on that. To acknowledge and preserve this diversity, its preamble declared this nation as a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. Its intention is to secure its citizens on the principles of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. However, the divisive and discriminatory ideologies and creeds continue to dismantle these foundations. These divisive forces are bent on the exclusion of minorities, discrimination against vulnerable communities, and marginalization of the poor. They stifle democracy and endanger communal harmony, and thus pose an extensive threat to the very life, livelihood, dignity of Dalits, Adivasis, minorities, and other marginalized groups which form majority in India. Thus now, India witnesses a bipolar division, as highlighted earlier, with a tiny minority of dominant castes and affluent communities emerge as rulers who wield enormous power over the poor and socially excluded. Further, and thus the majority remain continually socially ostracized, economically exploited, and politically powerless. As a result, the constitutional framework, which carries the laudable values and guiding principles such as democracy, secularism, socialism, equality, liberty, and justice, have no adequate place and space in today's Indian socio-economic and political realm. Adding fuel to the fire, the right-wing party that is in office have support global fascists and corporate giants to loot and subvert this country, while the disadvantaged and the marginalized have been deliberately excluded, discriminated, and sidelined by the divisive and disruptive agenda and designs of the fascists. This really warrants immediate attention of the marginalized community to rise, challenge, and change the oppressive scenario to their favor. Here comes the role of Dalit Christians and Pasmanda Muslims, as they form majority among Christians and Muslims respectively. Muslims constitute around 14% of Indian population and Christians 3% according to the 2011 census in India. Among Muslims, the Pasmanda Muslims who hail from the groups that we talked about form a majority. In short, among Muslims and Christians, persons from untouchable groups form the majority. Both Pasmanda Muslims and Dalit Christians face exclusion and discrimination without equality, dignity, assertion, power, and peace within their religions. So this alarming trend, both in the secular and religious domains, need to be challenged and set right for achieving equality, justice, and peace for all, especially those who are victimized in both religions. Therefore, Pasmanda Muslims and Dalit Christians need to come together with their unique faith identities and differences and emerge as a strong force both theologically and politically to challenge the oppressive status quo that prevails both in secular and religious domains. This is something essential and urgent considering the persecutions that they face both in the larger society and within their religions. It's high time that Pasmanda Muslims and Dalit Christians met and engaged in dialogue to deliberate the current status and evolve a strategy to take our common interests for their rights and space forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Edwin, for your clear presentation, also for the courage to denounce, problems in your country, and also to highlight tensions that are, among minorities, between minorities and majority. That this is a big issue everywhere, I would say, not only in India, but always we have this tension. Traduco un po' in italiano, quindi ringrazio molto per questo intervento e anche per il coraggio di denunciare quelle che sembrano delle discriminazioni, soprattutto questa tensione che c'è tra minoranze e maggioranze nel mondo, che è un rischio che corriamo in ogni parte del mondo e in ogni realtà. Penso anche in Europa il dibattito è aperto, quanto mai aperto. Quindi, thank you very much for this presentation, but also for showing us with clarity the situation now, and but also the hope, the hope that these two communities, the dialogue between these communities, how this hope can build a new India, it is also something like I would say a pilot dialogue. It is also a possibility, as we wrote together in the book. It is a sort of example of Christian-Muslim dialogue for to be implemented in other countries. Quindi dicevo che questo è anche uno sforzo per vedere come il dialogo islamo-cristiano tra due minoranze in India possa essere anche un modello per altre possibilità in altri contesti, no? E quindi presenta delle peculiarità che possono offrire qualcosa di interessante. Quindi thank you very much once again.